Okay, so if you didn't know, you are in the Finding Your Nonfiction presentation, and this is, so you can leave if you need to, is that first step into realizing the possibilities of finding just the myriad of possibilities that you have open to you, even if you're a fiction novelist or whatever else you do, that these are very valid options. My name is Amy White. I published through Familius in California. This is my nonfiction that I ended up with after years and years of fiction writing. It does have a high element of fiction to it. Dressing the Naked Hand is puppets. So I always have to say that. And it took me years before I didn't blush. I'm sorry. With the DVD in it, that I have little 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds coming to the library. I'm a librarian. And they quote back the scenes because we have little scenes in there. So take a look. It is available back in the corner in the vendor room that for sale, and Amazon and everywhere else. And they want a book too, but I have been very slow because I have other projects going on. I would like to kind of ask how many of you are already writing nonfiction? Okay. So can I ask what some of the topics are that you're working on? Childhood, so biography? Yeah.
Mine's more lyric essays, flash. So like childhood and memoirs.
Okay,
LDS nonfiction self-help about being able to create object lessons from every experience you have in life.
See, I love it because there's just so many possibilities, and I hope that you leave here thinking of a whole bunch more. They always say that nonfiction is the bread and butter of publishing, and because it just keeps going. They're pretty timeless. I have to say from experience, that's probably a true statement. It's bread and butter, but that's about all you can buy, at least so far. But I knew going in that puppetry was not a huge area. All the previous book sales, we looked them all up, and they're not terribly high. I just felt compelled to put the information out there that I could not find when I wanted to learn how to make puppets. And I had access to some incredible puppeteers, performers, and people that create puppets. And one of my spot illustrators just walked in. Hi, Jess. I'll show you. He did a cartoon for me because I really wanted a cartoon in the beginning. And so I kind of conscripted him. Shanghaied him when he came to the library. All right, where was it? I wanted to make puppets. And so this book is just me documenting that entire process. Because you have to write things down in order to know where you're at, and so you can go back and remember. Particularly, I can usually do a one-off. I can do the first one really good, and then I forget, and I totally mess up the second one. The second time I try to achieve something. So I had to have really good notes, and I took tons of pictures. I did originally have an illustrator, but he couldn't finish the project, so we ended up with photography, and that was an experience in and of itself. If you're looking at, because it's such a specialized topic, it's not like you had to have a very experienced illustrator, or you had to have the photographer on my shoulder, or on our shoulders while we're making the puppets, and so that it was a different experience. I would imagine cooking, a lot of if you do a cooking book, that a lot of the time you're doing your own photography and staging and things like that as well. Anyway, enough of that. Let's learn about finding your nonfiction using that research for more than just a novel. And I really I love quotes. Novels are like paintings, specifically watercolors. Every stroke you put down, you have to go with. You can rewrite, but the original strokes are still in the texture. And that's what it is. So it's really good to start with some really basic research and just writing all that stuff down like I did. And writing nonfiction is like sculpture, a matter of shaping the research into the finished thing. And it's beautiful writing. It just flows. It's not like a novel that has a mind of its own. Although if you let it, nonfiction will take over and have a mind of its own. So finding your inspiration. We all have our childhood memories and our biographies, and those are are really wonderful. You want to make sure you're writing those up. But what are your hobbies? What can't you get enough of? What do you really enjoy reading about or learning or studying or just doing? What are your obsessions? What do you want to learn? What would you just dive into if you had the opportunity? Somebody said, hey, go to school, you can do absolutely anything you want. What would that be? Those topics of research. Who do you know? Do you know people that have interesting lives? That it's just funny how you just meet people when you start talking to them, and they have just fascinating stories, and you're like, that would be a fabulous book. So there's, writing somebody else's biography. And, what's on your Pinterest boards, by the way? What do you obsess over? Some of the subject ideas, I just collected a bunch. You don't have to write these down. By the way, if anybody wants this PowerPoint, yeah, I have paper, yes, I'm thinking. You can write down your email. Let me just pass this around. Yeah. If you would like, I can send you the PowerPoint so that you don't have to madly write. There's all kinds of things that you can write about. I have friends that write about going through illness and disability and the relationships that affects. So that's a very personal experience, but it's more real, still biographical. Or they write about their kind of life, where they grew up and where they are now, the things that they've been through. Travel writers, think of it. I would love to travel. And to be able to travel right. Just do the cooking and the crafting, which is where I ended up. Education, just any of those unique experiences. Art, so much. So I happen to like sloths. And I wish I had written this book. There is a sloth sanctuary, and they have produced this book, A Little Book of Sloth. And it is the most adorable, and it's just picture book style. It's got the real pictures of the rescue sloths, and they just do an adorable job telling about the sloths and how they treat them and how they care for them. And the sloths have these little stuffies that they snuggle with, and frequently fights break out over a stuffy. And the winner's determined by who stays awake the longest. They just did an awesome job. There's photos of them, I guess the best way to carry the sloths is in a bucket. So, say a little bucket of sloth. Just the turn of phrase is just adorable, and it's just done in a picture book style, but it is a fabulous book. It doesn't have to be this big, epic adventure. I happen to know my daughter's coach. She's an equestrian, or was an equestrian vaulter, and was paralyzed, and is now working towards the Olympics in horse dressage riding. But in the meantime, she coaches a national award-winning, or first place national team, multiple first places, with equestrian vaulting. And her upper kids are actually going to the World Equestrian Games in Austria this year. So the things that she's been able to do, it's an incredible story of, at 19, paralyzed, and starts a club teaching kids, which basically she is the poster child for the worst thing that can happen to your kid. And just the inspirations that she has. She is a motivational speaker. There are film industries that are, film people that are interested in her story and want to produce her story, and they're looking for a writer. And I'm there, they know I'm a writer, so we've been writing her biography. It's in the hands of a director right now, and shopping that around. Not just her story, but also fictional stories, in case a biography just didn't take. So we wrote I wrote some other stories that just deal with equestrian vaulting, because who has ever heard of equestrian vaulting before? It's a beautiful sport, but it's not in the Olympics, and not many people know about it. So it's fun. I enjoy. It's who you know, someone inspiring, or do you have an expertise? Maybe something that hasn't been explored elsewhere. I happened to take a class at a conference on cracking the story code and script and text analysis, and I was blown away. And I started, emailing the teacher and saying, I found a pirate copy of her class instruction, And I started reading it. Hi. So I started reading it, and I would email her and say, oh, this was just really cool right here, but I don't understand this point. And by the end of the summer, she said, okay, I let one person out at my class each year, you're it. And then she didn't teach class. So I've spent the last, I guess it was 2010, and I've spent the intervening years working side by side with her. She calls me her pet project, to see if somebody can learn the class without having taken the class, if I can learn the materials. And I've become so high up on her list that she's approved the book. Both the graduate level textbook that we're working on and a trade book, as well as spin-offs that we might be doing, which, Robert, we're looking at cracking the story code for directors. We're looking at cracking the story code for music, because it's an amazing system of analysis that goes across the board. It's not just story. Everything has a story, but you can even plot music on this. And it's unique research we even have to patent. But it's just finding those passions and pursuing them, or looking and actually saying, wait a minute, I really did have something that I just, I kind of left that one hanging. I'd like to do it more. Are you getting ideas? Are things coming? So hopefully. Or, hey, what about puppetry? That one was just in my lap because my coworker, Mark, I just wanted to learn how to make puppets. And so we did. And it just turned out, it was the book that sold, it was the bird in the hand. Sometimes I'd like to kind of leave it, but it keeps coming back. But it's really fun when you get the recognition. I've got the kids that come into the library and obsess over the book and the puppets. And there's the one boy, he's going to be an amazing puppeteer. And to think that I kind of influenced that. If not for my book, he would never have discovered puppetry. And it's a big part of his life. He's using it for his science fair project and his history fair project. And it's fun. All right, so look at the expertise that you have. If you're writers, you can look into that area of your life. Have you, because if you're doing writing, you've looked in all kinds of areas to make your writing better, whether it's discovering, being a better dialogue writer, or if you really had to figure out time management, or if you had to really dive deep to figure out voice, and you think you've got just something just a little different to say. That's when you can just look at all of the things, everything in your wheelhouse, and start using those. And just write them up anyway, even if you never intend to publish. Yes?
So if you have the idea of, hey, I bet a little coffee table book about sloths would sell like crazy because everybody's posting pictures of sloths on Facebook, and they'll buy it for their friend who's sloth obsessed, whatever.
Especially after the show.
How do you go about... I mean, right, like you would take all your own pictures, or would you just write this story? And how would you go about submitting that or pitching that? Like, where do you go for something like a small coffee table book about sloths?
And you just you go through and you see, you look at other books like that in the bookstore and see who the publishers are, particularly the new ones, and make sure they don't already have something like that, and really sell it with a unique angle. As far as the illustrations and the photographs, I did have to do my own photography and learn Adobe Photoshop in 3 months. The pictures are not as good as a professional. I mean, hopefully it's not terribly obvious, but we were down to the wire. I didn't have an illustrator anymore. What do? I could write a book on Adobe Photoshop now on how to pull hair from out of a background. And like a sloth, you pretty much would have to go to a sloth sanctuary, or because you only have like 1 or 2 sloths at the local zoo. There's only 1 sloth sanctuary. Unless you had a really, if you were looking more for an illustrator, I would leave that up to the publisher, or the editor, and just send them the text. Because an illustrator could do a really good job on something that's hard to obtain any other way. Although it's a good excuse to go to the sanctuary. At least there's part of the travel, right? Maybe you're already published and you do school visits, or you're a teacher and you've been observing school visits of authors and things, and you think, you know what? I know these kids really well, and I know that this is something that's maybe not being hit. Maybe if I did a great outline for storytellers or for writers that come to the schools, that would give them some help. These can be pamphlets, they can be magazine articles, they can be trade articles, even blogging. And I was just talking to somebody that she was blogging about, she had a conversation with her 18-year-old self, and she put it on her blog, and now it's being published in a magazine. So it's just amazing where it will take you, and it's a great credit to build your portfolio. I'm thinking art. Your credits. That's film.
Your resume.
Resume. Like, it's been a long weekend, you guys. I am going on 9 hours of sleep since Tuesday. So, all right. So you need to then, once you've gathered, said, okay, I really like these ideas. How can I do this that's going to be incredibly attractive and appealing, and maybe even just different? So look at all the different ways you can actually put that material into writing. A lyrical essay. You could do letters. You could do lists. Especially, some of these. There's some of these books that sell that are just so very basic. One of my great friends, she publishes. It's basically a journal with some questions that you fill in, and it's selling like hotcakes. So, well, definitely better than the publishing. And I know she's doing pretty good. How are you going to tell it? First person, third person, second person. Second person would be a little bit of a challenge. It's all you. But experiment. You may have to go back to the original because I don't know if that might be a hard sell. So, light bulb. You have an idea. Now what do? Okay. Dig deep. You've been digging, you know some stuff. Go even deeper. Then read wide. And this is where you read not just everything on the topic, you read everything on that topic, but then you read all kinds of books on all kinds of subjects. Keeping an eye on how did they do their formatting? Oh, well, look what they did with the graphics. Look how they color-coded those pages according to theme or topic or whatever. And don't forget to look at the comic books and the fiction books, because they will have really interesting things. And your job, and I love this, I don't know if you've heard of the term bricolage, to be a bricolier. And this is somebody that pulls from every single area and genre and piece of your life, and you just pull in all of that experience to give a really rich experience in your book. Now, I had really great advice from somebody, and I always remember it. When you think, oh, well, I'm going to save that for my next book because it's too good to waste right now. Or I have this really great idea, but I'll save that one because I've got to have something for that next book. Don't save it. You put everything, all those beautiful, fabulous, perfect things that you can think of that make that book the very, very best thing you possibly can make it. That doesn't mean you're stuffing it. It just means you're really making it the best. Because I can promise you, the other ideas are going to come, and the next book will be even better because you stretched and you pushed yourself. And don't ever hold anything back. So this is where you're including everything. Websites, films, multimedia. Do the gamut. Just go everywhere. You are training your brain and making sure that you really have this great, unique perspective or something that's fulfilling a niche that's not been explored. In puppetry, I was trying to find books. I found little kitty books with pipe cleaners and toilet paper holders or the cardboard things and tin foil and one book that, it was great, but you could open it up in the bookstore and say, oh, okay, I don't need it. It's, I see that now. I can do that. I wanted to know, how do you make a mouth palette? And I didn't even know what a mouth palette was. I had to kind of make up the name. How do they make that structure? What glues do they use? I don't want it to be some cheap thing. I really want it to look good. And so that's why I wanted to do that book, because I could not find it. You get snippets on YouTube. You get little snippets in blogs and places, but never just all together. And I wanted to have fun. There's tons of fun in that one. It is a book for immature readers, mostly. So, and that's boiling down to the 10 to 15-year-old range right now, and adult men. That's our audience. Oops. How do I go back? Is there a key? I think I skipped that. Okay. All right. Now you're going to... There. Oh, wait, maybe. Did that? Whoa. I don't know what it did. Haha. I don't know what I did. If I do this. No. Alright, you guys. Oh, Robert, do you know how to show taskbar, end slideshow, display settings. Swap. Oh.
It looks to me like, let's go out of this.
Yeah.
And let's go to
Okay, I gotta say something.
Yeah, it's just that. It's just adding like these right now.
Sorry, that's not intended to function with this.
It's gonna be like a peacock feather.
Yeah, it's awesome. The base of it will be like
That's
Oh.
something this one will be. So that where you can actually take up feathers here, just the last.
Yeah.
I cross it every.
Oh, there we go.
sorry.
Nope, we are good. Ah, there we go. We'll just click through it. Whew, you guys. Oh, well, it did it again.
You looked at it funny.
I did something. Oh. All right, we'll just kind of go. You'll get to see all of it. And you guys can get this. If I. Okay. Oh. Okay, researcher top. There we go. So choose the focus. So you've gathered everything. This is way too much. You're going to boil your brain with that much information. You need to narrow it down. Now, I admit, I'm kind of a little ADHD a little bit, and so I cannot handle. Full screen? Yeah. I can't handle too much information. It's JD Payne earlier today said it just perfectly. He's like, all right, it's like putting you on a beach, white expanse of sand, and saying build a sandcastle. Like, frozen with the possibilities. Well, over here, or well, no, maybe over here, or maybe over here. Put yourself in a sandbox. And if you put them, if you know, have a sandbox, a world, a place, a starting point, then you can then build the sandcastle within the sandbox, and you can just go from there without having to, yeah. So just go like this, and yeah. So we'll just do that. Oh, and I can do that. A little bit bigger. So too much information equals overload, and both for you and for your readers. Focus on a particular topic of interest. I did have this problem with the puppetry book. I had everything from simple spoon puppets all the way up to marionettes and ventriloquist dummies. No, do not. I cut it down to, we call them stuffets, turning a stuffed animal into a puppet, hand puppets, and advanced puppets. So the hand puppets are kind of soft. The advanced puppets are more structured. And then we moved into the second half of the book. And every time I went through it with the editor, and we got to the middle stage after those 3 workshops, I was like, oh, that's only halfway through the book. It was torturous. Then we went through making stages, how to perform, and then the patterns and things like that. So it still has about 6 sections that we had to go through, and it was intense. We dropped the marionettes and the ventriloquist dummies and the simple puppets. I figured enough books are already on that one. So choose that focus, then I'm going to ask you to walk away. Just leave it. You've consumed all the materials, you've found and narrowed your focus, and now you're going to give yourself time to absorb. You're going to get your perspective. You're going to just dream about it. You're going to think about it. But leave the material alone. Just let it simmer. And sometimes I have to do that for like 6 months. But as soon as you find yourself forgetting about it, go back, okay? That's one thing. Don't just ignore it. That way. Now you're going to make moving notes. This is where you're going to walk around and it's going to be in your head constantly. You're going to carry a pad of Post-its or note cards. And you're going to write down short notes to yourself as, let them percolate up to the top. Just one idea per note. And then just move to the next one. And it's a movable paper file. And you can just, stuff them every night in a folder. Now you're going to, after you've got them, reread your notes. When you feel like you're done and you've got, like, oh yeah, that's a really cool idea. Oh, okay. And now your ideas are kind of repeating and just going deeper. Now you're going to go back, you're going to reread your notes, and you're going to explore all the ideas, maybe fill in those things, those extra things that you were thinking of. And as you're doing this, start to think of what logical procession would you use. If you're writing a biography, do you want to start now with a moment and then come up? Do you want to just think of the things that you can do? Just start thinking of I'm losing my voice. Think of how you're going to put it in front of your audience. And make sure you flesh out any of those holes that you might find. So it's starting to take shape in your mind, and you're starting to get a handle on it. Now you're going to do the micro sort. So you're going to focus on one set of notes at a time. This would be like this chapter, this segment. And place each note, just group them. If you have a little file folder that you can put them in, the recipe card file, or put them in sections on a whiteboard, sticky notes, and start to think, is there a logical arc, an overarching story, or theme that's starting to develop? Are there holes that need to be filled in? Is the coverage complete? Is there too much? As in my case when I said, no, we're cutting that. Now that you've got an idea, the theme's starting to percolate, now you're just going to dive for the meat, the actual main course. And this is when you go straight to the heart of the subject, and guess what? You don't have to start writing it at the very beginning. You can start anywhere you want. Those hot topics that are just begging to be written that you just can't wait to write about. Just dive into that. You can hop from chapter to chapter, topic to topic, because if you want to be flexible, let your brain use these things, these processes, and if you're doing something you love, you're kind of like, if you were an artist, you're always doodling, Jess. And so if you are always doing that, ideas will come to you. Like, oh, you know what, if I was talking to this school, or if I was working on a project like this, and you can just write that out and put it where it needs to be. Writers figure out what they want to write by writing. So you actually physically need to be writing. And I forget, this isn't just, there we go. Then you review all your writing. Better time check here. Review all of your writing, do the weeding, and does your writing flow? How does it feel? Does each subtopic fit in its larger heading? Do things need to be moved around? Is there still an order? Is there still an arc? Is it making sense? Is that theme coalescing even more deeper? Discard and tighten up the text as needed, and then craft the ends. Now, I wholeheartedly believe that your ending and your beginning need to be written last, after everything else. Because in your beginning, you want to hit them with the power, and you don't really know what the power of your piece is. Nonfiction can still be incredibly powerful, and it takes time. You want to pull those readers in. You don't want them to let go. So you want your strongest writing there at the beginning. And then at the end, you're not just going to sum up. I mean, if somebody wants to sum up the book, then, they didn't read the rest of it. So what you're going to do is you're going to hit those insights, those pops. When you read a poem and all of a sudden it just hits you, those moments of clarity, those things that have come to you, or that statement that you want to make that everything this book has been about. It's really fun. In movie terms, anybody seen The Martian? So, what is the theme of The Martian? And they did this with music. Their pop. It wasn't just writing, but this did come from a book. What's that ending credit song? I Will Survive. There you go. So this is where these things come out. And so I always save those for the very end, because those need to be absolutely the best. Because you are the sculptor. This is just your little inspirational thing here. The material's already there. You're already discovering it and playing with it. Your job as the creator, the author, the artist is to see the possibilities hidden inside. That's what makes you unique. And that's what's going to make your nonfiction so enticing that I would hope that, I know the publishing industry, but I really believe that you can find a home. And honestly, if it's a topic that you dive into and you just totally love, like cracking the story code, it's just been an obsession with me. And even if we have to self-publish, we'll be out speaking and doing workshops and trainings. And that is when you would self-publish a book. Get the right editors, of course. And then, because you're being your own marketing, and you don't really need a publisher other than, I am telling you, there is no way I could have designed that puppetry book. David Miles is an incredible designer, and I am so incredibly grateful for all the work that he did, because I could not have come up with something like that. So, but there's always options, and you can hire designers too. And so I'll send this, anybody that wants the PowerPoint. There are some links here for nonfiction resources, a lot of them that I found on researching aspects of nonfiction writing for writers and editors, how to get your book published in 6 painful steps, when to get your short nonfiction published, the Pushcart Prize ranking, and so you can look at what others have been able to do. A lot of that will be memoir stuff. And selling your nonfiction book, part 1, finding the right publisher, and she is a 3-part series that you can go through with blogging. So questions, we have
14 minutes.
As I say, I'm supposed to be at the registration desk. It's telling me, my alarm wasn't telling me what time. Anybody have questions? Yes.
Balancing research because you love the subject matter with actually writing about that instead of just taking in more of it,
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you strike balance?
I learned this the hard way because I collected everything. My stack of research papers are like this on puppetry, and those are just the papers that I printed. It's not all the other stuff that I looked at. And the multiple times, because we were teaching workshops a lot of the time, and I'd be reworking how to do and teach and do a workshop for, the state of Utah hired us to do it one time, and the library wanted us to do a whole series on teaching puppetry, and so I'd work up all these things, and I would just devour everything. But when I would sit down to actually figure out, I would be absolutely paralyzed when I had to write the simple puppets. It would just, and I just would hit a wall whenever I tried to write about ventriloquist dummies. And Joe the illustrator, he was just so, he's a ventriloquist maker, and he would always bring these little, drawings of things, and it would be fabulous, and I really, really liked it, but there's a point where I just couldn't take it. And when we actually started to go through with the editor, and I just could not handle it. I mean, those were all day long conversations on the phone, reworking and going back and forth multiple times. And she said, what about this? I said, you know what? Let's just cut it. I know I have put months of work into that. But we're not going to go any further. Let's just make it shorter. And I had to reason with myself and say, okay, there's already books on that. And okay, book 2 or something like that, and advanced puppetry with the ventriloquist and the marionettes. That way, because I was making everything and taking the pictures at the same time, and it was overwhelming. So you just have to cut bait. You just have to say, you know what? It's Aristotle. You can't just do all of it. You have to choose a segment and then move on.
A thought on that. What helps me a lot is when I review something or read, doing the research stage, I will dictate usually, or sometimes write or type out key points. And so it's the key points that take and synthesize this whole big volume of information, and here's what's relevant to me, here's what I can see I can use and apply in this situation. And so if I do it on a per item basis, meaning this book, this website, this article, as opposed to wait until I've gone through 3 months worth of them, then I have all these key points that I can real quickly grab. Oh yeah, that spurs all the memories on that element. So that helps.
I am stuck on Cracking the Story Code, the textbook. It's well over 600 pages. And I don't know how to bring it all home with with Katie, the professor, adding to it all the time. But I feel like I'm her interpreter, and I'm trying to be, but it's hard.
And take everything I say with like a million grains of salt, because I'm really new at this and I'm not published or even finished with the manuscript. But I'm having an easier time writing my nonfiction than I am writing my fiction right now.
It's
one of the reasons being you got to the point where you walk away.
okay.
So this is me coming back to an idea I started 5 years ago. And when I came back to it, I had this aha moment of, I'm going about it the wrong way. It was all written like chicken soup for the soul style vignettes of experience I'd had and then relating them to the gospel and things like that. And I had this aha moment of, nobody is going to care about my life. They don't know me. But what they would care about is how to do it themselves. And I had this kind of shift in thought of, I need to teach people how to train their brain to see those things in their own life. And ever since then, the book's kind of taken on its own thing. But when I get to a spot where I'm stuck, that's when I go back and I read my scriptures or I do a little more research. And I kind of use it as you do enough research, but at some point you just say, I'm going to start writing. I've got enough. And I haven't hit publish, so I can always go back and change it later. But if you just say, I've got to learn more, you're never going to start writing. So just start writing. And when you get stuck, take a research break. And as soon as anything inspires you, jump back into the writing. So that's my thought.
But I find myself, all right, so my first go-to when I'm avoiding is all the dishes get done in the house. All the vacuuming, all the blankets get washed and just hung out because I like the smell of it. And then my second delay tactic is to I'm just going to do some more research. I need to do some more research here. I just don't know enough here. Those are honestly my delay. They are my procrastination. They are my crutches that say, it's my disbelief in myself. I don't believe I'm capable of it. So I'm just going to avoid it for a while. And that's why I have to.
Makes sense. I haven't actually published anything or finished anything, so maybe you disregard everything I said.
Anybody else? Where are we at? Yeah.
You wouldn't happen to know what rights or approvals you have to get if say you want to do a story somebody who died 100 years ago?
Pretty much. I'd have to research it a little bit more, but I would think it's supposed to be anything like if your copyright, your personal copyright ends 70 years after you're dead.
Okay.
So it's kind of free reign. And I know that with Cracking the Story Code, the philosophers that a lot of time we quote and use and stuff, they're all dead. Most of them. And it's not, giving them credit for their research and explaining how it inspired the process of the story code and how it actually works. But we definitely try to skew towards the ones that are already dead.
Along those lines, what if you wanted to do, you know how like Serial, the podcast, or like Making of a Murder, what if you wanted to do a story about a topical event, like they have the documentary drama about O.J. Simpson, something like that, that's really interesting to you. Can you do that? And are there legal problems with that?
Usually you're going to have to go interview, or, at least, the law officers and everybody involved there, the legal, if the person's still around.
Could you get
because otherwise,
if you did it wrong?
you have them sign agreements, say, and you kind of have to prove yourself and say, I'm this, I would like to write this biography. At some point you've got to maybe say, you can approve my outline, but I'm gonna, at a certain point, I'm gonna just write it. That's one of the things we're having a problem with Cracking the Story Code is all the changes. Yes. Anybody else? Yes.
So how do you apply these steps when you're writing more of a storyline nonfiction? My great grandmother's 95, and I'm wanting to start writing down her life stories.
Read a lot of biographies and find the one that just really appeals to you. So you think, oh my goodness, they did such a good job on that. We're always looking for fabulous biographies in children's. I'm a children's librarian, so you can go more of a children's book, under 100 pages, or you can go the full, just beautiful, rich stories. And it is very much like a novel, and you will approach it a lot like that. But you've got the benefit of real pictures and things too.
Well, I just want to ask, is she still alive? Is she here?
Oh yeah,
yeah, she's still alive. She lives up in Canada, so I have people on interviews and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I would say maybe just put that list of questions, things you'd be interested in, just do a full interview with her and get a recording of that.
And there's a really good book that Donald Davis writes that's called Tell Your Own Stories that has great tips and hints and things that you can use. Tell Your Own Story. Donald Davis. If I've got the title slightly wrong, just look up Donald Davis. He's very arguably the best storyteller in the nation.
Don't delay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I work in film, and so I actually sat down with my grandpa and did kind of just an interview, asking questions about things I was curious about, his youth, his life, and it was literally a week later he went to the hospital, and he lived for 8 more months, but it was always heavily medicated, just really struggled and not of the health to do anything like that anymore. So that kind of stuff becomes extremely valuable. Don't delay.
Yeah.
Regarding copyright and such, I have an attorney in Salt Lake that I call and ask advice. And there was a story that you saw the film that was a story that was told in conference actually, and all I had was what was written up there with the statement author unknown. And so I called my friend, the copyright attorney, and he called me back in a half hour and had where the novel was published in 1896 and the author died in 1956 and the copyright still holds for another 10 years or whatever it was. And here's the place to negotiate. He had all the information, so I negotiated with the people in London for the rights on it, but it was the crucial thing was calling the copyright attorney.
Yeah. Anybody else? I'll say because I still obsess about everything. I still teach some puppetry. I'll be teaching Cracking the Story Code in June, and the flyer's back there, and my cards are there if you want to get a hold of me, or or contact me about anything, I'd love to. And I will make sure that everybody where's the paper that's got, right up there, okay. Make sure that you get the PowerPoint. Just know, all right, so I won't strip out those cracking the story code graphics, although last week we were instructed by the IP lawyer that we need to remove all of the graphics while we go, because we're applying for the patent as soon as possible, so within the next week. So don't
just
share.
Personal.
Yeah, don't share. They're, copyrighted already, but yeah, the stronger kind of a patent.
If we have, 1 or 2 minutes left,
Mm-hmm.
can you just address for everybody the know your audience sort of a thing? And
You do. That's a very valid point. You really need to target your audience and say, who am I actually writing this for? One of the examples, when when I got the cover for Dressing the Naked Hand, it was pink. Lots of pink. It's still really bright, but it was pink. And I knew from experience that I was not appealing to Susie Homemaker, which is what the publisher thought. I knew that every single adult puppeteer I knew was a man. And the women that were doing it were just not very many and few, and they weren't really serious about it. They weren't the ones going and actively finding material and how to do it and doing the YouTube stuff. And kids. So I said, I didn't even want my feminine name on there because I did not want to turn away that audience. I keep thinking, well, maybe I should have done just AI white or something like that. Just, they overruled me on the title, and they placed my name first. They wouldn't let me put it third. Even though I was the writer and cattle prod, the others just did everything I told them to. I put them in front and said, you're filming today, now. So you really have to know your audience, because even now I think it's too poppy to write for most of my audience. And that's, I think, why I'm capturing the 10 to 15-year-olds so much more heavily than I am, the men that I thought. And so yes, definitely know your audience. Where they are cognitively, don't overwrite for them. Don't be all flowery if you're aiming it to a younger audience. You can be lyrical if you're writing to an older audience. Kind of have to know their moral reasoning too. Say, who is my target audience? Is it, if you're writing for an LDS audience, are you writing to them? Or do you want to write something that reveals some really great, you're trying to get across some principles, some ideas of how do you live your life, but you want to target the ones that maybe don't know about that? How do you then get those principles into a format and in a way that that audience will then pick up the book and accept it and not reject it? Oh, that's a Mormon thing. And so sometimes, know your audience and make sure you're writing to them. And sometimes it means that you're a little bit more vague on some of the things, but you find out what those core things are that you're trying to get across, especially if it's a memoir. That central feeling, that theme that comes out of all that research and all that writing, and you make sure you stay true to that, and always make sure that you have that audience in mind, because every single thing you write, okay, you have that world of story that you've developed. Whether it's nonfiction or fiction, you have that world that you've developed. Well, within that world, the characters and whether they're real or not real, like if JJ going through this book and being a little pain in the patoot in there, you always have to keep in mind who is reading it, because they are the only ones that really matter, is that target audience. And yeah, hopefully. I was appealing to the immature adult. So it starts with, I think it says, in the beginning, there was shadow and there was light. And in the light of the evening fire, early man discovered he could tell stories against the firelit walls. And it was good. And he called them hand shadows. So appeal to your audience, okay? All right, thank you for coming.